Hey guys, quick legal tip. You can't say this. There's a lot of things real estate agents shouldn't say, and this is probably one of them right here. But before we get to that, let's talk about taxes. Anderson County, Greenwood County in the upstate, the tax bills are out. Greenville's supposed to be out, I believe, at the end of October, and we believe Spartanburg will be out at the 1st of November. In the Midlands, Aiken, Calhoun, Florence County, Lexington, Richland, and Saluda all are out. That's important to know. Lexington and Richland out. The two big counties are now out and have to be collected. Tax liens, once the tax bill is issued, it is a lien against the property. It has to be paid. We can't wait for the lender to pay it later. It's a lien. It's got to be paid at closing. Tax bills are also paid in arrears. So when you're paying tax bills now for a tax bill that's been issued, you're paying for all of 2020, even though 2.5 months of 2020 haven't occurred yet. So you're paying in arrears. So what that means is when we do a closing from January 1st until day of closing, we're prorating the tax bill, the actual tax bill. We're collecting it from the seller. At closing, we're also collecting from the buyer from the day of closing till the end of the year. Causes a couple of issues there. So because number one, the tax bill's out, you need to redo your net sheet because 2019 taxes are not being used now as the basis of proration in those counties with the actual tax bill of 2020. Now, the other issue you've got to think about is if the seller's at 6% and the buyer is going to be moving the property tax rate to 4%, what happens then? Well, unfortunately, because the tax bill's out and it is a lien, we have to collect it at 6%. So from January to the day of closing, the 6% from the seller, and from day of closing to the end of the year, 6% from the buyer, even though the buyer is going to be using it as a primary residence. So the buyer's having to come out of pocket at closing early. Now, once they apply for the 4%, they can ask that money to be refunded. So that's a problem. That you have to understand. The buyer could wind up bringing more money, but it also means you should not be signing for the buyer addendum when the tax bills are issued saying that we'll prorate taxes at 4% when the tax rate is at 6%, because that means in that situation, if you put that in your addendum from January 1st until the day of closing, we're collecting 4% tax rate from the seller, but the buyer has to pay the difference in the tax bill because the tax bill is a lien. It's at 6%, and you've agreed to only prorate base at 4%. So the seller's only paying you at 4% and the buyer's paying the rest. So don't do that. Now, the legal tip this week is you can't say this. And this comes from one of our listeners and viewers that had a really good idea on a topic. So negotiations are going back and forth between the buyer and the seller. And he says he hears this comment all the time. My client will take, or my client won't accept that. That's a bad offer. My client's not going to take that. That's a comment that you probably need to just lose. I mean, there's times it can be appropriate, but two problems with that. Number one is you have a duty to present all offers. So when somebody's going to present you an offer and you're going, my client's not going to take that. That's television. That's what they do in $1 Million Listing, LA, which is my favorite show, but it doesn't work in real life. You have a duty to present all offers. So don't tell the other side what your client's not going to take before you've even presented it. When you get the offer, you got to present it. Then you can come back and say, my client's not going to take this. You may say, I don't know if my client's going to take it, but don't sit here and tell them what they are and aren't going to do. That's bad. But the most important thing I think is the problem is that people start running off of the mouth and goes, well, if you bring me an offer of $195, my client will take that. Or my client's not going to pay more than $190 for this house. Now, I understand it's hard to negotiate back and forth by paper, and sometimes we just have to pick up the phone and negotiate. But before you do that, you better make darn sure that your client authorizes you to throw those numbers out, because you have a duty of confidentiality to your client and you have a duty of loyalty. So you better make sure before you tell the other side what your client will and won't do and start throwing numbers out that you have the permission of your client. You just can't sit here and say, well, my client is only going to take $195, when the fact is your client might have accepted $193 had a written offer been submitted. So you better be careful on that. All right. Before I leave, don't forget we have a great podcast. I'd love everybody to listen to it. It is linked below. So if you'll click there, this week is with Patrick O'Connor and Hannah Norman at Coldwell Banker, and it goes over video marketing. These guys are phenomenal. There's other episodes on wholesaling and representing buyers when the seller is a FSBO seller. So please like it, share it, and subscribe to it. All right, guys, y'all have a great weekend.